imizuzu. And good morning phulaphuli ekhaya. Okay, xa bembukeli ngoba kubaphulaphula udala siqhuba nabo. And warm welcome kuwe mntu phaa kuFacebook naphaa kuYouTube. Elixesha ke uba masincokole nalo ke undwendwe lethu kudala ndithetha ngalo basebasinalo ke namhlanje ngoba xa ingolwesihlanu nobe nomphako wempelaveki siphela mpekaveki. I know abantu belindele umfundisi imfundisa kakho Cape Town and ke he's old school kakhulu ngoba ke akafuni kwanto engathi ungamconnecta virtually ufuna uze estudiyweni so makakho estudiyweni means akakho so sawunyamezela ke kufuneke ke njengamsasazi ube nayo induku esemgqubeni oyifihlileyo nantsi ke induku yam Anele Matshisi angatshisi istudio ke kodwa tshisa isitulo sikatata Maphinda. Mr. Matshisi, good morning and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, ma'am, and thanks for having me.
Siyabulela kakhulu ngokuba ube nathi xa sikutsala ngebhatyi besenditshilo ke nathi Anele Matshisi, born and bred in the Western Cape and now based in Pretoria, creator of Inside Out, a platform ayenzele okanye dedicated to all things millennial men and women. So sakhe sinqokele namhlanje ke sijonge into yobana umphako xa ubheka empelavekini funeka ube ne-Padkos, funeka ube nento oyihlafunayo, funeka ube nento oyityayo. Mr. Matshisi, ndingatyanga xesha mandinikele kuwe namhlanje naba baphulaphuli beKeith Ngesi Radio nababukeli.
No, Nkosi kakhulu, and thank you again to you and your team for this opportunity. I'll quickly jump into it, and this morning I want us to talk about the quiet quitting of gifted people. You know, the quiet quitting of strong people, the quiet quitting of loyal people, dedicated people, and how to respond to it, which is the most important thing. And you know, in corporate, there's in corporate we actually define a quiet quitting as the resolve of employees to do the bare minimum. So they are not leaving the business, but they are choosing to do as less as less as they can do. But when it comes to the context, and Funasi si Tetengayo, I would define quiet quitting as the silent resignation of the gifted people, you know, them still showing up, still committed, but on the inside, they have resigned because on the inside, emotionally, they are exhausted. Mentally, they are drained. Life has just been lifing, you know, but they keep showing up. And these are the visionaries. These are the parents. These are the people who feel Uguti. They have people who depend on them, and for this reason, they cannot let go. They need to continue. So I would like to explore a bit and on quiet quitting and how we can respond to it. And there's a verse in Second Samuel chapter 23, verse 14 and to 16. So it tells of a story. If you would allow me, I'd just like to read just the one verse and then I'll explain the rest. So verse 15 says that
scripture CP.
Oh yeah, it's 2 Samuel chapter 23 from verse 14 to 16.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So I'll just read verse 15 for the sake of time, and then I'll explain the other two. It says, David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." So the context here is that David and his mighty men, as we now know them, were running away or were moving away from one experience. They were moving away from their past and then trying to grab hold of the future. The past that they were coming from, David was a shepherd boy, and the mighty men, when the Bible describes them, it says they were men who were in distress, they were in debt, and they were discontent. So in other words, it's men who were constantly faced with pressures and all sorts of problems that they needed to solve. And then they were in debt. And then discontent for me was the one that jumped out. It's because it says that bebenganelisekanga. In other words, whatever was happening in their lives, these were men who were that you would look at and say these were defeated people. Impilo
Sure.
iboyisile. And
Mhm.
then when you look at David, he was the shepherd boy. He was coming from the background and he was not yet the king. He was promised. So they were on their way, but they were being chased by enemies and they find themselves in a situation where they're in a cave. And then in this cave, the cave is surrounded by an enemy, the Philistines. But then there's an interesting scenario that plays out in this moment. And in the moment, that the Bible in verse 14, it gives us the location, Yamaphilisti. It says that they were camped in Bethlehem. And in verse 15, David tells the men who are next to him that he is thirsty, but he's very specific about where he wants water. He says he wants water from the well that is close to the gate in Bethlehem. So Bethlehem being the exact location that is occupied. Now, this is where it gets interesting. You and I would think that David was speaking in normal terms, that he was looking for water as normal water to drink. But the men around David were actually able to identify the language of defeat in David. What David was essentially saying to them is that Bethlehem is not the geographical location that you and I would think of, but Bethlehem in his mind reminded him of a time when he was a child. And the reason why he wanted water specifically from that well, because that is the well he used to drink from when he was a child, when life was simple, when there were no responsibilities, when everything was easy. But now he's standing at the back of the cave, looking into the cave, and he sees everyone and everything that he feels called to serve, called to lead. And he sees that there is no way out. And he starts reflecting on his life. And in the back of his mind, the only thing that I would rather have today before I die is the water from from the same place where I grew up in. In other words, he's now reflecting on his life. And the men around him were able to identify the quiet quitting of the man who would be a king. So what they then do for David, they did not argue with him. They did not rebuke him. But what they did, they began to show him how to win. So what they did in verse 16, it says, so the three men who were with David, they never said anything. It says, the Bible says they went out and then they went through the Philistine lines. In other words, they approached the battle lines. They did not fight the enemy because it was his enemy, but they showed him that it can be done. And so one of the things that often people who are gifted or the strong ones among us that we often struggle with is that we always think, Uguti, the solutions always have to come from us. And so we are standing at the back of the cave, depressed. We are looking at everything that we feel responsible to, our bills, the children, cars, careers, and we feel like we're at a dead end because right at the end of the cave, we can see the light, but at the same time, we can see the shadows of the things that are preventing us from going to the light. And so now in this position, the men go out and get him the water from the exact location. They get him the simplicity. So the beauty of that moment is that David was speaking in it, like we see a lay of time. We see David speaking about the past and then he's referring it to the present. But the men did not respond to him about his imaginations or his reminiscing about the past and acknowledging what is happening now, but they began to talk to him about the future, that the future is not yet over. Where you are is not the end. it can be
Okay.
done. We can proceed from here. And so when they went out and came back with the water, we know he refused to drink it because of the honor that he felt these men had given him. He did not feel worthy to drink the water. But the issue was not the water, but it was the quiet, it was the silent moment where David felt ukuthi this was the end. And the interesting thing about this experience for me when I was looking at it, it was that we know David as the guy who slayed Goliath. We know David as the guy who writes poems, who writes songs, who wrote a bit of proverbs, who often wrote prophecies. But in that moment, there was none of that. In that moment, in fact, it felt like God was quiet. And so, as we reflect on this weekend, a lot of us will be in situations like that, or already in situations like that, where we feel like God is quiet, God is not doing anything, because you are used to God using you to find solutions for other people. And in this moment, God was showing him, Ugoti's strength is everywhere. It's not just in
Sure.
you. It's not
Yeah.
just through you, but he can use anyone and everyone around you. And the other interesting thing about this is that David and caves and God, that like when you read the life of David, whenever he was in trouble, the Bible will always say he went down into the stronghold and then he would
Yeah.
talk to God. In other words, he not only identified with God as a shepherd, but he also identified God as a man of strategy in war. But in this particular moment, he was so mentally and emotionally exhausted that he just stood at the back of the cave and quit. And
Anele,
one,
sidiniwe.
ma'am,
Sidiniwe. Unyaka uyaqala. There's this fatigue. Asiyazi uba sithini unyani as busitsho uyaphakama because ke umphefumlo usadibene nenyama and wenzele oku ufanele uba uyakwenza, but enyanisweni we exhausted. And abantu
yeah,
abantu bakujonga uba hayi not yena useleke esemandleni. Kubakho ixesha uba amandla angabikho or uzive uba jonga ndiyamuruka ngokwale term ese-Eastern Cape, ndiyagowa ndiphelile, and quietly nyhani ke ukhwithile. Although abantu besakubona uphakama usenza izinto, that is why ufumanisa uba abantu bathi khiqi bawile, awukwazi utulela kavuka okanye utheni, iinto ezinjalo.
yes. And the beauty of that is that it is normal. But because we are so used to being strong, we are always the ones who are used to we're used to being on the giving end. We're giving
Yes,
strength to others. It feels foreign, Koti, when we are now on the receiving end, where we need people to water us when we have
sure.
been the ones watering them. So,
Mhm,
but one of the solutions that text gives us is that one, David surrounded himself by men or with men who were stronger than the thing that was confronting him. So,
Oh.
in other words, it's very important for us to surround ourselves with two
Mm,
types of see, victory is caught or victory is taught. Uh, and
sure.
and it's important for us to surround ourselves with two types of people when we're looking into our future. And
Mm,
that is that one, surround yourself with people who will either show you how to win.
mhm,
These are normally people at your peer level where you can like, no, I did it like this. Oh, okay, you're struggling with your budget. Okay, I'll show you how
mm,
to budget. Or is it debt? Or is it whatever? They'll show you how to overcome the thing.
yeah,
And then you need to surround yourself with people who will actually teach you, who are way stronger than the thing that you are struggling with.
facing.
There's a
Mm,
passage, I think it's in Joshua, where he at some point there was a small nation that was constantly under attack from five kings, and Joshua assembled his army and then destroyed the five kings and put them in a cave, but he
mhm,
put them in a cave, but he did not kill the kings himself.
Mm-hmm.
He called the man from this small town and he said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to put your feet on the necks of the kings that were assaulting you and attacking you, because victory is also taught. You need to surround yourself with
Sure.
people who will teach you how to win. Oh, Dr. Not Miles Monroe, Les Brown, Dr. Les Brown says it nicely. He says there are three types of people in this world. He says we have winners, we have losers, and we have people who don't know how to win. And so sometimes we fall in the third category. We are not losing, we are not winning, but we just don't know how to win.
Stagnant.
And so surrounding ourselves with abantu who are stronger than the things that are confronting us is a life hack, because now we get to leverage their strength. The other thing as well is that just because you feel overwhelmed, you feel depressed, you feel cornered, does not mean that you are less purposed, does not mean that you are less destined, does not mean that you cannot make it. It will not happen. Victory is not a straight line. And sometimes we forget that Uguti victory is not a straight, it's victory for a reason, because you were attacked by something confronted you. And my last point is that, which I found interesting in that passage of scripture, is that it says that the Philistine army was encamped in Bethlehem. The interesting thing is that throughout the life of David, he fought the exact same enemy until he died. It was the Philistines through and through, from Goliath all the way. It was always the Philistines. And that is a part of life. And some of us are dealing with ailments. And you feel like, but where is God? Where is God? I see him moving through me, assisting other people and helping others. But I have this one issue in my life. Some people, it's a habit. Some people, it's an addiction. And constantly fighting the same thing over and over and over. But in this particular moment, it felt like this thing that you seemed to have control over is now having control over you. It has you backed up in a corner, feeling depressed, feeling low, feeling slow, and you just about to quit. In fact, you quit. And one theologian puts it nicely. He says that the name of the cave is called Adullam, and he says that at the cave of Adullam, that is where David quit and God took over.
Sure.
And it's so important for us to recognize the end of our strength and be okay with the end of our strength, because we know he who called it's easy to quote this Bible, like the Bible verses, not by might nor by power, but it's easy and until your back is up against the wall and they're outside about to repossess the car. and sometimes they actually do repossess the car, and they repossess the house, and they do all these other things. And will you still quote the same verses? Will you still do the same things? And the reality of it is that sometimes we're like David. We're like, nah, I'm not writing any songs at the moment. I'm not writing no poems to the Lord. I'm stressed. And I'm stressed. And that is where we need to tap into the strength that is around us, the strength that is above us. Because sometimes the strength that is within us, it gets depleted because we've been giving and giving and giving of ourselves. And
ithi cup ibe empty. Oko you've been
yes.
giving and giving and giving, and then ude nje ndizokhulula in the interest of time, Mr. Matshisi, how can you tell if someone wena ungapoqamajonga, that one is quietly quitting, okanye kudala isikolo saphuma apha okanye cawa yaphuma? Can you tell? Qonda uba ngoku
That's actually a very good question. Again, I'll pull from the example that I was using. David isolated himself from the rest. He became recluse. He went back and he watched he had this objective perspective of the cave. Ogoti, this is how now it looks like. So we identify, we know our friends, and our friends know
Yeah.
us. And if you know that your friend, but now they've been oddly isolating themselves,
Mm, mm,
check
mm,
in.
mm, mm.
Oguti, is everything okay? Is everything good? Check in.
Sure.
Normalize calls, normalize invitation. I know we are this generation, we really love our spaces, but normalize inviting people like, hey, come over, we're doing this thing, or just normalize checking in. The second thing was that I mentioned at the beginning, Uguti, in as much as the mighty men of David were men who were in distress and in
Mm,
debt
mhm.
and a discontent, that those experiences did not disqualify them. They
Sure.
actually qualified them, because it is through those experiences that they were able to identify Ukuti, we are first defeated through our
Yeah.
language. So, and that's one of the reasons why they were able to detect
Mm,
Oguti, okay, through his
mm.
language. It's what he was
In
saying
in
sounded so
Afrikaans.
sweet and so poetic, but it was in it. We know exactly where he is. People who can
Sure.
locate you, verbally, they can say, okay, nah, that you, this is not you. And the
Mm,
third thing is we to give grace. To give ourselves grace when we are going through difficult times.
mhm,
Two, um, to give grace to the people that we can see are going through the
mm,
most. Give them grace. The worst thing that you can, the worst thing that can happen to you, is to be in a situation where you are going through something and you have people coming in to rebuke you and being hard on you for being weak and being soft and all of that, and yet they don't have full context. And so to give grace, and the men gave grace to David by not rebuking him and reminding him that he's going to be the king, and how much they
mm.
sacrificed to be with him. And they were in the cave, not just the men, but them and their families and their livestock, and everyone was in there. But they gave grace, and then they
Yeah.
made a plan to show him, Uguti, we can still win. And but when it comes to also giving ourselves grace, that is the most important thing in the journey of our respective purposes and destinies. So we need to be able to give ourselves that grace as well, Uguti.
Mm.
No 2 days will be the same. Today I'm gonna feel
Yeah.
like the winner. Today I'm gonna feel like the conqueror. I'm gonna be quoting, Jeremiah. I know the
Mm, mm,
plans and all of that. And tomorrow, we're gonna sound like Job. That, hey, listen, just
mm,
naked I came in, naked I leave, and
mm.
and it's okay. And it's okay. So to
Yeah.
give
Yeah.
ourselves that grace. And so, because sometimes the battlefield that is happening in between our ears is louder and stronger and more violent than the battles that are confronting us in life. And
Yeah. Ne?
so we quit on the inside. And sometimes those battles are not as big as they are. It's just how we magnify them in our minds. And we
Mm,
believe,
mm.
Uguti, they are bigger than they are and than what they really, really are. And so my last thought would be, let us
Before you left
normalize.
court. Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
yeah. Before you left court, ngabuthetha iyeza le mibuzo apha kum into yoba is it a good thing or a bad thing? Or can you say i-quiet quitting yinto enye ne-burnout? Njengoba nditshilo ekuqaleni uba jonga siphelile azange ndayibona into yokudinwa. Wonke umntu endidibana naye udiniwe, unyaka uyaqala sidinwe kwangoJanuwari, ndacinga uba into yoba sisadinwe zezikaDisemba kukubhenquza. February jonga sidiniwe, nguMatshi ngoku ukekela asiqhuba sitsala ngerim. Is it the same thing as i-burnout? Is it a good thing into yobana uziqonde uba ndiphelile and quietly ukhwithe? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, mhlawumbi iyaxhomekeka uba kusemsebenzini okanye ukhwithe phi.
mm. Yes and no. Uh,
Mm,
Burnout is usually short term. you
okay.
know um I'm exhausted. What do I do? Okay, I maybe just need to go to the cinema, switch off, and just
Yeah.
watch a movie, recoup, or I just need to sleep, or just do, we all have these activities, these small
Mm,
mundane activities that when we do them, they refresh us and they make us feel
Sure.
human. So, but with quiet quitting, it is often a result of a number of consistent
Okay.
difficult experiences that you've had to go through, you've had to manage, you've had to
Mm.
survive, you've had to overcome, and eventually they wear you out. So
Mm.
the burnout happens over a period of time. And
Okay.
so you can go to the cinema and come back, but you would have
You're
made the
right.
decision, ukuthi now on
Mm.
the right,
Okay.
I'm done with this, you know. And and so quietly you resign. But this is the interesting part about quiet quitting and why it's so difficult to detect, is that we often remain committed.
Mm.
So you'll still show up, but you'll
Okay.
show up and give 10% of from the
True, true, true,
110% you
true.
normally give.
Mm,
Today, like
mm,
now, I'm going to
mm,
give
mm.
10% moving forward. So
So,
you'll still be standing there in the back of the cave saying motivational things, saying powerful things, telling people about the vision. In fact, if someone were to approach you and ask you, what is your vision in life? You'll still give them the vision. You'll still give them the
mm.
goals. You'll still give them the ideas and all of that. But quietly, you have stopped believing that it is possible for you.
Yeah, ne? Yeah. I think mphulaphuli nawe apha ekhaya uchole nto because nyhani ke andiyazi maan akulayifekeki, andiyazi uba ndiyibeka njani na ulife awulayifisi, ikhona nje into. And I think it is common. Andifuni ube ndibuza
Yeah,
uba how common is quiet quitting. It is very, very, very common. Umntu uvele azithi cubu ubucebu bucala, abe eqonda uba jonga and I'm sure mhlawumbi ke ii-employers nazo need to deal with quiet quitting ngendlela mhlawumbi ezibona ngayo, maybe be upfront about the workload and then also kuqapheleke, oh, okay, because I don't think quiet quitting is laziness, but
no, not
yindlela
at all,
yokuqonda
not at all.
ukuthi so I don't know. I don't know. And as Busicho, it does have disadvantages, and of course the advantages ngoba ngenye ixesha kuyafuneka uba ukhe uthi gunyani ke ukhe uzimamele and recoup and uphinde ke ube re-energize and ube phaa. But amanye amaxesha kuyafuneka uthi wena wamkele njengoba usaziwa uba ukade ungumagayva, kubakho ixesha into yobana ke noko nomzimba, impilo nayo yonke into ingakuvumeli. Mr Matshisi, mandikuyeke ke unike your last thought ndizokwazi ukukhulula amazwi
All right.
akho
My,
okugqibela.
my my last thought is that as we approach the second half of the year,
Mm,
in New Year does not start in January. It does not start May
mm,
1st. In New Year starts when we change our minds about the
okay,
same thing. And
okay.
as we approach the second half of the year, and as we approach the weekend, let's take this weekend as an opportunity to rethink and re-strategize
Mm,
the second half of the year,
mm,
and give ourselves a new year on the 1st of June. Give yourself, in
mm.
fact, in the Xhosa calendar, is limel.
Yeah.
That's when it would ordinarily be, New Year would be around that time. So
Mm,
um, but let's give ourselves an opportunity to restart the year,
mm.
to rethink the year and reimagine the year as well. Now that we know Uguti, being stuck does not mean
Yeah.
that it's over. You're just stuck. That's
Yes.
all it is. But it's not over. You'll still get out of the cave. You'll still get out of the dark room. You'll still get out of the dark place,
Mm.
and you'll still win, and you'll still become the king in whatever you are destined to become. So, and that
Definitely.
that does not change just because you do not have the answers. And my last thought, is that one of the things that I live by is that just because situations out of my control does not
Mm.
necessarily mean that the situations are working against me, because
So,
I know that in all things God works for good. Ngos.
yeah. All right, thank you so much. Siyabulela phulaphula bokuqala banathi benkqubeni sibamba ngazo zibini phaa ku-Mr. Anele Matshisi, the creator of Inside Out. Ke ungamlandela makasesitsho naye futhi ke uba ufumaneka phi na, so that umuntu ufuna ufumana more nezinye ke ii-topics athi adilishane nazo ufumaneka phi, Mr. Matshisi?
All right. So at the moment, I'm on Instagram. So it's
Okay.
Anele Matshisi on Instagram, and then
Okay.
also still on Instagram, our platform Inside Out. It's Inside Out _ZA, and on Facebook, it's just Inside Out, and
Okay.
then and so you should be able to find me there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Siyabulela kakhulu ngexesha lakho, and usinikile umphako not only wale weekend, ngicimba ngoweveki yonke. Until next time, thank you so
Sure.
much. All right. Njengoba senditshilo ke Mr. Matshisi lowo masimkhuphe. Time check, it's 8:35 Central African Time. Keith Ngisi Radio, we're doing radio according to you. Aliyah, at your best. Please be at your best now in Phulaphuli. And yeah, masiphume kweli cala.